Hello and welcome to the Outer Limits of InnerScience, where we explore human transformation, consciousness, and the science of meditation in order to empower people to heal and thrive. And my psychic knowingness, I think there's a guest joining me today. Dr. Hillari Hamilton is here.
Oh my
Anywhere?
goodness. Oh my goodness, you did it, Andrew. You're so telepathic. You tuned into me and here I am.
That's amazing. I drew you to me.
Oh, this is going to be such a great conversation, and you just used those words, being telepathic, to call me in. What is being telepathic?
I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows, but I do feel like the information is available to us in the field, right? Like
Yeah.
we can tap into anything. And I think we tend to get in our own ways. We have these programs that we run over and over, and we've filtered out all of this information that's right there that's available to us.
Yeah, I think we're moving to a time where we are going to be able to be more telepathic. In fact, when we were just at the event recently, I was in line passing out our words. You know, Inner Science has these words that we pass out, and I was about 50 people in, and this woman reaches into my bag, pulls out a word, and then she goes, "Can I have one for my husband?" And I said, "No, he's got to come to the booth to get a word." And a flash of this name came to me, and it said Pam. And for some reason, it just came out of my mouth. I go, "Is your name Pam?" And she goes, "It is." And I was like ready to fall on the floor that I could figure out her name. It didn't even dawn on her that it was strange that I knew her name. But that allowed me to have this knowingness, and it just kept going throughout the week. I just think being telepathic can be like an energy that you're tapping into,
Sure.
right? That you
Yeah.
can connect.
Yeah, the information is in the field. And
That's
we've
it.
seen it at events where people, have their blindfolds on during a meditation and yet they can see. I've had multiple people who have done things like point to me
Mhm.
and they point as I walk by during the meditation. I'm like, "Are you pointing to me?" And they nod their head like this. I'm like, "How are they doing this?" But I remember Dr. Joe used to tell a story about somebody who waved behind him when he was standing behind them and they waved to him.
Yeah.
So we see those kinds of things all the time. And of course, Hemal Patel talks about the evolution of the species. And he's the one doing the research at Dr. Joseph Dispenza's retreats. And I
Yeah.
think this is an evolution.
Yeah.
We're learning, we're growing into our abilities. And it's just a matter of kind of quieting down those programs and all those other noises that we have and tuning into the information that's available.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, when we're at these events, we're having such heart and brain coherence, and everyone is having heart and brain coherence. That the energy in the room is just elevated, and everybody's like, "I had this synchronicity. I had this synchronicity. I had this healing. I had that healing." I think that we're creating this buoyant field with 2,000 plus people. So these things can happen that are supernatural.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that the world is opening up to these ideas. There's topics. This topic of telepathy has been on podcasts, it's been in books, it's been on Telepathy Tapes, that podcast,
Yeah.
reaching so many people and opening their eyes to possibility, which I think is
Yes.
amazing.
Yes, and that brings us to our guest that's on the show today. She's a neuropsychologist, she's a neuroscientist, she's a trained psychologist. She's retired now from traditional psychology, but she does some amazing research.
Yes, you've probably heard her before, and we're so glad to have her on the podcast today. Please welcome Dr. Diane Hennacy. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We would love it if you would actually introduce yourself so we could learn a little bit about you.
Sure. So first of all, I'm someone who trained in neuroscience. And when I say that, I mean that I worked in laboratories where I was doing traditional neuroscience and with electron microscopy and, measuring ion flow across neurons and crayfish axons and, measuring, that with an oscilloscope. Um, and was really interested in human consciousness, so went on to become a neuropsychiatrist, which means I studied both neurology and psychiatry, and then became an expert on autism after working with Sir Michael Rutter in the UK. So all of my training was either at Johns Hopkins or at the Institute of Psychiatry in the UK, Then I went on to be faculty at Harvard, um, at Cambridge Hospital, and after that was at UCSD, and now, I'm recently retired from private practice, and it's my work that was the, basis behind the telepathy tapes.
Wow, amazing. And it
Yeah.
sounds like you were doing work in autism before autism was really known to most people at that time, back then, right?
Yeah, yeah, we're talking about I went to England in 1986, and, I mean, even my colleagues at Johns Hopkins, where autism was first, the term autism, and the condition was first identified by Leo Kanner, who was the head of child psychiatry back in the '40s, so even though that's the institution I was at, most people hadn't heard of autism back then. Now everybody has.
Yes, because it's so predominant in, especially in the United States. So a lot of people know who you are because of the telepathy tapes. And I'm super excited to dive deep into that because how did you get from looking at autism to knowing that these kids were telepathic?
Well, so first of all, I mean, let me back up in terms of understanding why I was interested in autism in the first place. And it was as a result of meeting Oliver Sacks, who was a famous neurologist who would write these books that I hope to, I aspire to be, writing like Oliver Sacks. Let me just say that he would write about these fascinating case stories of people that would have these quirky syndromes where there was something that would some glitch in their brain. And then that would give you some kind of isolated, um, difference in the way that you perceive things or think. And so, like somebody who suddenly loses has a stroke and their visual cortex in the layer that's involved in color, and then boom, now they see their world in black and white like you do with a black and white TV, that kind of thing. And so I thought, "This is what I wanna do. I wanna study these kind of cases." And, um, but then when I saw this case study in his book about these autistic twins who were institutionalized because they couldn't take care of themselves back in the '60s, and the fact that they were able to not generate, but perceive prime numbers.
Mm.
And it was a game they played where one of them would say one prime number of 6 digits, and the other one would say the other prime number. And then, they were able to do that up to 12 digits, and it was validated by Oliver Sacks, who was going to prime number tables because, prime numbers, there's no algorithm for generating them, and they're a number that's only divisible by itself and 1. And so you've gotta just go through a lot of different computations before you determine that, "Oh, it's not divisible by anything but itself." And so anyway, but these twins weren't generating them, they were perceiving them out there in physical space, and they were able to generate them I say generate, but they were able to you know, articulate them in 20 digits, and the computers could only calculate up to 12 digits at a time. And when I saw that, I was mesmerized as somebody whose background was, as a kid, I was gifted in math, and I already had an understanding of the implications of that. And I have a brother who's a theoretical physicist, an expert on quantum mechanics and AI, and I just was like, "This is what I wanna study," and so that's why I became interested in autism, and so I was really trying to figure out savant syndrome, because to me, I mean, that's just as remarkable as anything the parapsychologists,
Sure.
and yet, it was something that was, mainstream, medicine was not balking against, they just didn't have a model for understanding, so I said, "Well, that's what I'm gonna understand," and it seemed to me that a lot of these savant abilities were very similar to what people who report to have psychic abilities report, that it's a perception. "Oh, I saw a vision," or, "I heard a voice say," or, "My guide, taught me," and so I started thinking about, well, why might that be? And because my whole point of, doing this has been to try to really understand the brain and consciousness and how it works. And I thought about how there are people in dreams who oftentimes receive information that is very similar to what the savants are able to experience just in their waking life. And I thought, well, that's interesting because in dreaming sleep, the left hemisphere is dominant. I mean, the left hemisphere is no longer dominant over the right hemisphere. In our waking life, the left hemisphere is dominant. That's the analytical, logical, language-based one. But when we're in our dreaming sleep, all kinds of impossible things can happen, and it's a very different world than the other. It's more creative, more intuitive, and I thought, well, now that's interesting that is the functionality, that there's this difference in brain functionality between these 2 very radically different, um, states of consciousness. And so I wanted to know, well, what do we know from, functional imaging on dreaming state? And I saw that also the frontal lobes are less active. And so I did a sort of a thought experiment. I was like, okay, well, who is it that, because now you have to realize that with my background, even without doing a CT scan on somebody, I can have a sense of what's going on in their brain functionally without having to do it because I understand how the brain operates from that standpoint. And so I'm like, well, who is it in their waking state would be like that? And I'm like, well, first of all, be a child. Their frontal lobes are, they're not as they're not fully myelinated, with the rest of the brain, so, they're having less of an influence over it, and then I thought, and that's gonna be somebody who is right hemisphere dominant, and that's really, individuals who are, neurodivergent, what we call autistic, because, one of the criteria for being diagnosed autistic is you have something wrong with your language. Okay, that means something's going on with the left hemisphere that's not, um up to par, and then you look at their skills. Oh, visual spatial pattern recognition, just very intuitive gestalt, kind of get the whole picture at once kind of thing. Well, I thought, wow, that, the autistic individual brain is more like that of dreaming sleep in terms of the operating system, if, for lack of a better word. And so I put it out there that if, because we have very little brain imaging on savants even. And so I
Wow.
just put it out there and I said, well, if anybody, and I said this back in 2005 at the Science of Consciousness conference when it was in Copenhagen. I presented a theory about savant syndrome. And one of the things I said was, this is what I would anticipate is that if you had, that autistic individuals, maybe why they have savant abilities is because of having reduced, frontal lobe activity and increased right hemisphere over left hemisphere, activity. And then I said, that I thought that that could be the case for, that if anybody could prove ESP, it would be an autistic savant because I thought that it was really a similar phenomenon. And it was after that, and after writing my book, The ESP Enigma, that was first published in 2008, in hard copy. It was after writing that, in which I also proposed that I was invited to go to India to meet these savants and to
Mm.
start doing some experiments with them and assessing their savant abilities. And it was when I was over there that the people said, "Oh, by the way, they're also very telepathic." I said, "Oh, okay, well, I guess, it's like a 2 for 1 thing here. I guess I've got,
Yeah.
study that too."
Wow. Well, there's so much to unpack there. Going back to what you said, where you started with the idea of the twins and having access to these prime numbers, it made me think about the fact that the information, any information, is available in the field. That it's just a matter of how do we tap into it. And then you started talking about left brain, left hemisphere, right hemisphere. Is there a part? Have you done research? Has someone done research where there's a part of the brain that we know or we believe might be more responsible for either telepathy or being able to download information that's available to us?
Well, I mean, I have some theories about it. It's really hard to do brain imaging studies on these children, and and a lot of that has to do with the fact that you get so much artifact if there's any movement.
Right.
And
Right.
if you've ever spent any time around these individuals, you see that they're kinda like this, they're just very, very fidgety. And,
Mhm.
um, and so it's problematic, and especially when you think about how expensive it is to rent the room where you got the MRI scanner, you got this kid that's, not gonna cooperate, um so anyway, so we really don't have much imaging, um, but at the same time, as I was thinking about how the brain works, one of the things that, I thought, well, if you were to reduce left frontal lobe activity, okay, if you had, so think of it in terms of instead of it being what do we need to turn on, think of it as what do we need to turn off. If you
Sure.
have, if you see that, like a lot of little children know things, they remember
Mhm.
past lives, they have little imaginary friends, whatever those, maybe they're not so imaginary after all.
Exactly.
Right. I agree with you.
And so you think, and then something gets turned off. And so one of the things that we know is that during the first 7 years of development, the major pathway in the brain that is happening that enables for the expression of language is it's one of the names for is the dorsal language pathway. There's a ventral language pathway and there's a dorsal one. And the dorsal language pathway is the one that connects Wernicke's area, which is involved in the understanding of language, with Broca's area, which is in the frontal lobe, left lobe. That's what's involved in the expression of language. And that's expression of language whether you're talking about, typing with your hands or writing or speaking.
Interesting.
They're linked together in that area. If I see that somebody has trouble with speaking, but they can express themselves through typing, then that makes me question whether it's the Broca's area. It makes me think it's another process going on. So that's the process of, kind of, deduction that I would go through. And so anyway, and it's like, well, okay, well, that area is developing during the first 7 years of life. And oh, guess what? In the non-speakers, this is like the focus of the telepathy tapes. That's the area of the brain that doesn't get fully developed. They go into an arrested development. Something happens, they're developing normally, starting to speak, and then something happens, and you know that doesn't happen. So I thought, well, maybe that the shutoffs didn't happen, and so then I learned of this research that after saying that, I learned of this research by the head of neurology at the University of Toronto named Morris Friedman, and what he did was is he noticed that people with a stroke in the left frontal lobe were more gifted that way.
Yeah.
And so then he used transcranial magnetic stimulation to reduce the activity in that part of the brain in normal people and saw that yes, indeed, it gave them, they scored statistically much higher on things for telepathy and also studied them for their effect on random number generators.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Mhm.
so that's one way that I think about it. Okay, but then another part of the brain that's been of interest to me is the angular gyrus. And and tell me if I'm talking over people's heads when I
No, this is great.
Even if you are, they'll go and look it up. I think it's so great because our audience loves the brain and is very familiar with a lot of different parts. So I'm even as you're saying this, I'm thinking, okay, we need a meditation where we anesthetize the left frontal lobe through meditation, and then we get more psychic. So no, please keep going.
Yeah.
um So what's interesting about the angular gyrus and the reason why I became interested in it is it's first of all, its location. Okay. It's located right about here. And so it's right at the crossroads of all of these sensory cortices, audition, and then vision, right? And then sensory motor. Okay. And most, if not all of the savants that um I work with and ones I haven't worked with that that are famous, like Daniel Tammet, okay, who can recite pi, the non-repeating, um, constant pi to over 22,000 digits.
That's amazing.
And he can do that because he sees all of the numbers, as they each have their own color and shape, and he sees them like a ticker tape parade in front of him.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the fact that that's how, he experiences it is due to something called synesthesia, and
Mhm.
that people have suspected might be related to the angular gyrus because of where it's located. Well, another thing is that the angular gyrus is also involved in the manipulation of symbols.
Mm.
So, and once again, getting into, what these autistic savants do, they've got this fascination with numbers, like pi or, Fibonacci,
Yeah.
what's, and, um, and so I'm like, "Oh, well, that's really interesting." Um, because, if you have a stroke there, you get, um something called Gerstmann syndrome, and Gerstmann syndrome, you don't know which finger is which, okay, which could
Mm.
explain, any issues with that area, which could explain some of what you're seeing with these autistic savants because they really have difficulty with that. But also, it causes dyscalculia.
Mm, what's that?
It means you have trouble calculating.
Oh,
Calculation is in the arithmetic that we learn in school.
Mhm.
right.
And a lot of these mathematical savants, they can't do calculation. They get their answers some other way. It's
Right.
it's not from calculation. And
Interesting.
and then the other thing about the angular gyrus is that it's the area of the brain that the Swedish neurosurgeon, when he stimulated it, it induced a partial out of body experience.
Interesting. That's
So
fascinating.
here you're having all of these things that I see with these kids, from they're out of their bodies a lot of the time.
Sure.
They've got synesthesia. They've got, you know, difficulty with knowing what, left from right. That's another part of
Mhm.
Sturtman syndrome. So they've got, and we know that there are alterations in the angular gyrus in autistic individuals. I mean, there's a lot of differences in the brain of people that are autistic, but the angular gyrus is definitely one of them. And the angular gyrus is one of the things that differentiates us from other species. That we're more symbol based than other species are not. And so I suspect that it has something to do with, and that's located, right at the temporal parietal junction, and so I was particularly interested in the one on the right hemisphere, because of this left hemisphere, right hemisphere thing, and so when I told Jeff Tarrant that, and he had one of these God helmets, just particularly to stimulate that, using, magnetic stimulation, and it did bring on greater psychic abilities, and this individual did it in. And so I think, so those were 2 theories I came up with just based on what I knew, and then lo and behold, they both, at least there's preliminary data that they bear fruit, so, um
Amazing.
Yeah, we do a lot of studies with EEGs, with people at Dr. Joe's events, and it would be interesting if we could focus. Like, I know your wheels were spinning, Andrew, on that.
Absolutely, and we bring in a lot of children, with autism on the spectrum, and some of them, yes, they're moving and jumping. Others will just settle in like they're being held in a nest, that they're
During the
I
healing.
perceive that they're so aware of frequency and energy that when they walk into a room with a lot of chaos, that they're like, "Get me out of here." Like they're just very aware of those things. But when you walk into a room at an event where people have been meditating for hours and hours and days, the energy in that room is really kind of sublime, and they drift off to sleep. And I was thinking
They
literally,
do.
I think we could do QEEG or EEG on these children because they're often they're with their mother or their father, and they just lay down and drift away. And I remember coming out of meditations and the audience is up and moving and the child is still just out, and the mother saying, like, he never sleeps like this. I've never seen him so peaceful,
Yeah,
but
some
he's
of them
in
put
this
their hands
net.
behind their head, like,
Yeah. But
it's
the
just
problem
full
is
on relaxed.
but the problem with that is that then you're getting their EEG while they're sleeping, and you're not getting their
Ah,
EEG
it's
while
true.
they're doing the telepathy.
Yeah, yeah,
It
good point.
it
Good
you know, yeah, but it is true, they're very, very sensitive to the energy, and I've had a lot of times when I was a practicing psychiatrist where, a parent might bring a kid in and say that yeah, and the kid would always be calm in my presence.
Mhm.
The parent would be saying, "Well, believe it or not, this is what the kid does all the time."
Yeah,
I'd have to say, "Well, I believe you," because I know that, it's different when people come here and
Yeah.
sure.
it just has
And
a calming effect.
and we think about that. One of the things that we talk about is brain and heart coherence. It's kind of getting aligned. Like when your thoughts match your emotions, match what your physical body is doing, I think they perceive all of that information. And when they look at you and see that you're aligned and calm and saying what you're thinking and those things are aligned. Otherwise, if they're looking at whoever, their parent or somebody else who's kind of misaligned, they're thinking one thing, they're saying something else, and they're showing something else. And I think those kids see all of those things, just like animals in nature. And why are animals drawn to some people and not others? And I think it has to do with that alignment that they're perceiving.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that they can definitely perceive the misalignment, and they don't even need to know the specifics of it.
Hmm.
They don't need to know that, the reason why you don't have a heart-brain coherence is because you're not happy with, your current life situation,
Right.
and yet you rationalize why you need to stay in it, and, um, they don't need to know the specifics of why, although, I mean, they may. I mean,
Yeah.
they may,
Yeah.
but they don't need I see it as very similar to how cats are.
Hmm.
And I've heard people say that. I've heard people say that autistic individuals are a lot like cats, and there's some truth to that, and that a cat reads the energy of the room.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's also a bridge, and I'm sure you would agree with um, people who are psychotic and or schizophrenic, where there's a bridge there too. Like there's some awareness of something. I've talked to them many times where, wow, I feel like they know a lot more than they should, and yet they just don't function really well in 3D society, this world that we've set up. And so they seem to have access to something, or maybe even be perceiving things that we're not seeing, and as a result, they just don't really fit in society, and so we end up having to medicate them or hospitalize them for their own protection.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's like if you think of I as a neuropsychiatrist tend to think of kind of like, um, cognitive function, for example, as like hierarchical, okay? And what I mean by that is that, you have to realize that I've studied neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative disorders. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm looking at, what people, where they get arrested in their development, and then I'm also looking at what people are losing as
Right.
they suffer, different insults to their brains. And so there's sort of this hierarchy of, well, if you lose this, then that if you can't do that, then you definitely can't do this, right?
Mhm.
And so one of the things that's intriguing with these autistic savants is that the usual hierarchy for most of us doesn't seem to apply for them.
Hmm.
It's
Interesting.
like, usually, if you can't do arithmetic, I mean, you're not gonna sign the kid up for calculus.
Right, right.
You you know? So, well, what's going on there?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And how did you get to using the spelling boards where, they were spelling things out? Is that how you kind of came to the conclusion that they could communicate with their parents or with other individuals? Like, how did that come about?
Well, so the children that I studied over in India actually had access to computers, and so I didn't run into letterboards over there. Ironically, because the letterboard was actually first introduced by an Indian woman who
Mm.
here in the US who had a non-speaking son named Tito, and this is a woman named Soma, whose last name nobody can pronounce, unfortunately, but she developed this communication method, for her son. And so how I learned about it was that when I came back from India, and I was like, "Oh, I really wanna, if there's anybody who's telepathic, I'd love to study them." And then literally within 6 months, I had this parent contact me saying that he had a daughter who he and his wife and these 2 therapists had discovered was very telepathic and who he thought it would be important for science, and so I went and studied her. And she was typing into one of the what's called a talker, where it's like an iPad with an electronic voice. But then what happened is that when I said, "I need to do the telepathy experiment with a visual barrier between you and the therapist," what happened is she regressed. And when children regress, they go back and they want they go back to an earlier stage of development and in some cases, what that is if they were potty trained, they stopped being potty trained, or it may be that, they didn't need their doll anymore, their teddy bear anymore to go to bed, but now all of a sudden they need it. So there's something that causes them to just kind of regress in their behavior. Well, in her case, how she regressed was she needed to go back to the letterboard for communication. And so all of a sudden, now I've got this person saying, "Well, we gotta go back to the letterboard," and I'm like, "Oh, what's that?" And I was, like, trying to understand, why is it that, she needs to point to this thing that she trained with when it wasn't a motor coordination thing, because, initially they start out with the letter board because the letters are big enough that you don't need to be as accurate, because they have a lot of problem with proprioception or their ability to know where their finger is in space. And so, and you're doing what's almost like occupational therapy with them when you're, having them, practice, practice, practice pointing to letters that get more and more accurate. Then you can move them to a smaller and smaller screen, or smaller and smaller device. And so anyway, so I knew that that wasn't the problem. It was psychological, and so it was really much more like a crutch. 'Cause it made her anxious to have something new introduced. And so then, when you have somebody holding something and they're moving it, they're having to move it, and then I need to understand, well, what's the process behind that? Why is the therapist moving this board? And what they explained to me, and knowing what I know about autism, it made sense to me, is that they tend to get fixated.
Mm.
And so unless you give them a kinda like with the movies where you have that, we're starting film,
Mhm.
they need some kinda signal that, "Oh, okay, you know, next frame,
Yeah.
next."
Mhm.
And so what I would see is the therapist would just be doing this. But unfortunately, the skeptics for whom this is just so mind-blowing to think that this stuff is possible, they think, "Oh, she's cueing with the letterboard. She's it's gotta be in, this position when it's this letter, that position when it's that letter," when it really I mean, I saw how this whole thing evolved. It wasn't like they'd been practicing with the letter board all the time, and then I, enter in and am a stooge believing it. But, and we've gone back since then. Other scientists and I have gone back and we've looked at all, that video footage and shown that no, there's no pattern where, board is in this position versus that position. So anyway, so that's but I and then I trained, on it. I mean, I went to a couple of workshops and I never became, somebody who uses it, but I went through the training workshop just so that I'd understand it because I really felt that as a scientist, I needed to understand this communication method that they're using. And from the speech, therapist perspective, why does this work? Why can't you do that? etc.
Do you think the board or spelling is a bridge, or is it kind of what exposed the telepathy, or is that kind of what they're somehow seeing is the information from the board or something like that? Like, would we have gotten to the same point without using the spelling? I guess is the question.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I think it's a legitimate question. And my answer is really, it depends upon the child. Okay, so there were cases of individuals who are autistic who were demonstrating telepathy, and there was no letterboard ever involved.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I mean, they type on a keyboard. It was discovered when they were typing on a keyboard. Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's not an artifact of that.
Right.
I had one boy I did research with who could speak the answers. I'm another boy who can write the answers. Um, the thing is that those individuals are rare. There are more individuals that are the non-speakers who use spelling boards now than there are that do those other things. And even they are a small percentage of the non-speaking
Mhm.
population. I mean, I've heard that there's like 30,000,000 of these non-speakers in the world, and
Wow.
only about 10,000 of them, have been taught spelling.
And do you know what percentage of them, based on your research, may have the telepathy or psychic abilities?
It's really hard for me to say.
Yeah.
It is really hard for me to say because and I mean, there's so many things about this that are fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you can have, um, a real major cluster in that's those kids working with a specific speech therapist, okay?
Hmm.
Right, and that's what I see, and so one could say, "Oh, well, that raises alarm bells because, this person is probably doing subtle cueing, and they just don't know it."
Hmm.
But I don't think that that's what it is because some of the most profound, evidence for telepathy that has occurred between them had nothing to do with the letterboard.
Mm.
It's just that it's just not that which we have in a controlled laboratory setting. It's those spontaneous things where the child knows something about the therapist
Right.
that there's no way they should know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that yeah, yeah, it was something that they bring up spontaneously.
Yeah, one of my friends who's a Dr. Joe student, she has an autistic grandson, and after watching the telepathy tapes, she was visiting her daughter and son-in-law, and she telepathically told the child, um, "If you can understand me, come touch my face." And the child got up and touched her face, and she was just completely blown away. I think the research that you've brought forward is just gonna open up so many doors for parents and children to have that knowingness of being able to communicate. It's just a whole 'nother level of understanding, gosh, how connected we really are and how intelligent these kids really are.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and so many of them, that's how they did the things like that is how they discovered the telepathy. It was them thinking, "Boy, how did the kid know this?" And then they just doing their own experiment. They're just, like, thinking, "Okay, I'm gonna think, hey, can you bring me a glass of water?" And then the kid goes and brings him a glass of water, and the kid doesn't ever do that. I mean, it's just like, okay, yeah, it's like it's pretty interesting, and I've seen them do things, as well, where they've been able to read some of them been able to read somebody who is not holding the letterboard,
Wow.
Yeah.
but I'd say that's the minority, but, yeah, so but, yeah, at the same so you've got that going on, yet at the same time, you have these individuals for whom they absolutely need the person they're telepathic with to hold the letter board.
Sure.
They for some reason, they need that to be the way it's set up.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
And why wouldn't there be all those differences, just like there is in the rest of humanity, where some of us are maybe a little bit more entangled with others and have some more knowingness or see things and know things, and then there's others that just are like, nope, not interested, don't even know that that's a possibility. But I think as a whole, as humanity puts more attention on these things and opens up to the possibility, then I think it becomes more real. And I think it used to be more real and more accepted until we started overlaying so many programs and getting distracted by so many things. So I think we're at a really important turning point where it's going to become more commonplace because we're seeing it demonstrated and we're proving it scientifically.
yeah, yeah, well, I agree with that. And what's interesting is that and this gets to the kind of the work that, um, like Joe Dispenza does, about coherence, okay, is that I mean, one of the things that I hear from these children is that they can't work with somebody, telepathically unless that person matches their own frequency.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
Makes
and
sense.
so it may be, something to do with a coherence, of frequency that they need in the individual they're working with. So that might be what you that may be why you see these clusters, nothing to do
Mhm.
with subtle, cueing or anything, but really more a matter of coherence and that they are, better broadcasters of their thoughts.
Mhm.
They're more coherent, or that the child, is has more of a desire to merge with them because they talk about it being rather than it being a signal going from one to the other, they talk about it more like it's that they now are sharing
Mm.
consciousness, more like there's kind of a merging that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're headed there.
Yeah.
There's actually only one case that I know of an induced savantism, and his name is Jason Paja. He was attacked coming out of a bar
Yeah, I know this case.
in yeah. He's savant and synesthesia. He's the only case that where he got both of them. And I met him many years ago. He came and did a TED Talks in Tacoma, Washington, where he lives, and he had to go back to school in order to try to explain what he was seeing. So he went and studied math in order to then
Right.
explain it. And he could draw it and he could talk about it in all these different frames. But one of the things that I always found fascinating as a video producer, filmmaker, I understand the idea of seeing frames, how we blur everything together. And he's seen every individual frame. So he could see the speed of light coming off of a car and know exactly how fast the car is going, for example. But one of the things you've talked about is like the speed or the time that their time perception. And I'm really interested in that because we've also recently talked to Ellen Langer, who did a study where wound healing was based on perceived time, not actual time. So I'm wondering, like, has anyone ever looked at these children who are perhaps perceiving time differently, and are their wounds healing faster or slower than normal because their perception of time might be different?
That's
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. That's a very interesting observation that about, perception of time. I mean, because you have to ask really, is that the causal effect or is that more like, an outcome of the same underlying process? In other words, that one of the theories about the differences in how we perceive time's passage has to do with dopamine,
Hmm.
right? And then so one of that's one of the theories about it, and And certainly, different states of consciousness, are related to you can evoke different states of consciousness with certain chemicals, okay? Well, so, is it related to that, or is it related to the psychological component of it? It can be a little
Right.
bit harder to tease out, um, what it's due to. Uh, is what I'm most interested in are those things that could in terms of experiments, are things that take it out of the physical realm. Because
Mhm.
because the physical realm keeps us kind of, in a paradigm that hasn't really moved that much from, the paradigm that we currently have in mainstream.
True. True.
And and I some of the things that I have seen suggest that materialism is fundamentally incorrect.
Let's go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is one of we're just touching on one of our favorite topics. The non-physical, non-material, when we start talking about spirituality, death and dying, near-death experiences, there's so much to unpack here, and let's dive into that.
Sure, I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Hillary.
Well, what's more than the non-physical? And I know you've done some research and you've done some keynote speaking on near-death experiences.
Yeah, I mean, well, so, one of the things that intrigues me, I mean, and I've had my own, 2 versions of a near-death experience,
Mm,
in one of them, it was when I was, around 13, 14 years old, and I was in a, canoe that was, flipped over in a river, and I, went under and basically had a life review. I mean, I was dying, and somebody saw what happened and went s who had been a lifeguard this summer and saved my life.
wow.
Um, and then I had another, um, this wasn't a near death, but this was one where I was hit by somebody when I was crossing the street. I was unconscious for several hours. This is when I was in my early 20s before going to medical school, and so something changed in me during that period of being unconscious, um, and when I went to a lecture by PMH Atwater where she was talking about all of her research she's done on near-death experiences, I recognized myself in the list. I was like, "Oh."
Mm,
And I went up to her afterwards and I said, "I had, all of these things happened to me after, an accident in which I was knocked unconscious for several hours." And she goes, "Oh, that counts." And so, I she said, same thing. And so, and it is sort of similar to me, it's sort of similar to acquired savant syndrome. I mean, I was gifted beforehand, but afterwards, I somehow, yeah, I started having more synchronicities, heightened intuition, stuff like that. Um, and so, what I wonder about is, why is it, what is it about a near-death experience that, um, brings about those changes?
mm.
Yeah, what is it about, like, why did Jason Padgett, get acquired savant syndrome after, his concussion, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and what I thought about was that, having an out of body experience, seems to be a connecting, bridging principle between all of these different really heightened psychic abilities that people have, whether you're talking about the people that were some of the best remote viewers. They were the ones who could astral project.
Sure.
They weren't just sitting there going, "Well, it kinda looks like this," they just would project
They
their
were there.
consciousness over there. They're just like, "Give me the coordinates, and I'll send my consciousness
Yeah.
over there," right? Unbelievable, and, but, I mean, it was being paid for by, by our taxpayer dollars, right? Military
Yep.
funding,
Yep.
intelligence funding. So, anyway, and so, that or, you have a near-death experience, there's an out-of-body component to it,
Yeah.
and and so and people who've had severe trauma such that they disassociate on a regular basis, those I found that those people oftentimes have these abilities. So I think that out-of-body experience is a common, thing, and the way I think of it, it's almost like there's now like a split in the seam,
Mm,
Mm.
right?
The veil is very thin.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, you've got you've
Yeah.
got you've got a tear there now. Fine.
Yeah.
You've got a portal
Mhm.
in
yeah,
whatever that is,
right.
that is the veil between your sense of, only the embodied perspective
Yeah.
versus, everything else that's out there that's not being filtered by the brain.
Yeah.
'Cause I
Yeah.
really do believe that the brain operates more as a filter.
Yeah, and I think you're right on. Also, I would bridge to that mystical experiences. Someone in a meditation comes out and they are a different person. They've had such a profound experience because I think they've dipped their toe in the quantum field or source or God or the mind of God or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And those same people are doing out of body astral projection, are accessing the field. That
Yeah,
that same thing, that same all information available to everyone. I think it's amazing, and that is a very common experience. And I love that we there's so many different ways of accessing it. Hopefully, we don't all have to have a near death experience. We can actually do it in meditation. Some people probably do it with psychedelics, but I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to, as you said, like tear that little seam that makes it possible to go back and forth. Because
yeah,
sometimes once that door is open, now it's accessible to you more easily because you're not just believing in something, now you know it because you've had the experience.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and I mean, ideally, it is something that you have control over.
Yeah.
That's the ideal situation.
Yeah. We
and
were actually meeting with some youth recently who said, "Wait a minute, if everybody gets if we're evolving to this state of being everyone's telepathic, that means there's no secrets." And I said, "Yeah, exactly." They said, "But you could tell they were like, but I want to have some secrets." Like, well, maybe look at that. Why do you want to have secrets? And or it'll be a different world if we all know everything, we have access to everything. Then there won't be secrets, but no one will care. Like if your parents are watching you, if your grandparents are watching you right now, and you're doing something you're ashamed of, they're not judging you.
Well,
They're
right.
beyond that.
yeah, I mean, another way that I would put it, because I mean, it's true, because a lot of people, like, when they first heard about the telepathy tapes, they thought, "Oh, these mothers or whatever, they're just trying to get glory for themselves," and, yeah, I
Mm,
mean, there was a like, no, when these parents first contacted me, most of them, I mean, yeah, the ones that are out in the media all the time, I mean, that, they, some of them do enjoy being out there in the media, but most of the people who contact me, that they're terrified. They're like, "Why can't I read my freaking mind? I can't I can't
um,
do I have any privacy?" I mean, they're like, "How do I live with this?" They're not contacting me saying, "Oh, isn't this wonderful?" Kumbaya, well,
right.
you're like, "No, what do I do?" So, that's the reality of it. But see, the thing is that, the if we live in a world in which there's no secrets, nobody can keep secrets. It's like, what you have to realize is that whoever's afraid that someone else might know their secrets, it's like, what I'd say to them is, everybody you're afraid would know your secrets, probably have even worse secrets than you.
That's right.
And once you find that out, you're just gonna be like, "Oh, shit."
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
Everybody's
not
let
that
off the hook all at the
Sure.
same
You're
time.
you're you're not gonna have to put so much attention into, whatever, because, whatever we're trying to hide about ourselves, that is exactly what gets in the way of our own evolution,
absolutely.
our own transformation, and so, and so there's always this protective, instinct, "Oh, no, I don't wanna, let go of that," but it's just like, Sometimes you just gotta rip it away, and just say, "Hey," and then you say,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's not so bad after all." I mean,
exactly.
a lot of
Do
people
you
feel better after the thing that they've been hiding for all these years is finally out because it's just
right? It's just let go of that. It's icky. It doesn't belong to you. What do you think about these nonverbal autistic children? Do you think they're here to teach humanity something? Are we uncovering something with your work that we're supposed to learn from them?
well, they definitely will tell you that's the case, and then I certainly think,
So they actually verbalize that, or not
oh,
verbalize it, but
absolutely.
what do
Abs
they say?
Absolutely, 100%. It's funny because some of them really put down, normies. They'll say things like, you know, um, you think, not referring to me, but, they're just like, "Oh, those normies, they talk about such petty things," you know? I mean, they see the human species as very superficial.
Mhm.
Wow.
They're like, "You know what? You guys, you gossip, you care about this, you care about that." I mean, they're really looking at humanity from a very, very, um, elevated lens. I mean, and, and so, yeah, they're right, I mean, you
Yeah.
really can't argue with them on a lot of that, you know? Yeah, and so some of them, I mean, are really, really, really committed to and say it's their mission and it's why they're here. It's why they
Wow.
chose to come here is because they see themselves as being part of a group that's here to evolve humanity. Um,
Gosh.
Beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
and we
is. Yeah, yeah, and
we use words. We're using words to describe concepts, and they're just symbols that we've all agreed to, and yet the telepathy idea of holding an image of an apple versus trying to describe it with the word apple, like, it's such a more complete way of having a conversation, of describing something, because our words are so limited. And when we have an experience like a mystical experience, words just don't do it. And I see it happen at our events all the time. And there's just nothing to say. You just hug and love on each other, and like, words aren't going to describe what just happened to that person. So I'm wondering, what is it that keeps you up at night? What do you want to know, and you just love to either do research or just to download something and know it?
um, well, I mean, I would say I mean, you're describing the arc of my life. The chronic insomniac, But I get a lot of my, best ideas in the middle of the night, and that's part of why. It's not that I'm, worrying about things. It's more I get an insight and
Mhm.
and my mind wants to take it where it will go,
Yes.
and that's not conducive to sleep at 2 in the morning. Uh,
Right.
Right.
but it is what happens, and so I sort of honor that process, um, and, um, and I really I'd say, that boy, there's so many things that are fascinating, but, I think at this stage in, my career, at this critical juncture, in terms of, for humanity, um, what I try to do is think about what are the experiments that I could do,
Yes.
um, that if I can pull them off and then also combine that with theory, okay, then it just finally kicks us out of this paradigm, okay? Because I see our current paradigm as very, very problematic. I mean, not only is incomplete and incorrect, but it's problematic and it's hurting humanity rather than helping
Mm.
at this point. I mean, there may
Yeah.
be a lot of great discoveries that came out of science because of the, scientific, method and, and this materialist paradigm. But we are ready, more than ready to, have something new come along because, the problems that, we all thought when we were younger would be solved with today's methodology. Yeah, we've got a lot more technology, but look, everything as a result of that technology has just gotten more and more out of control. I mean, we've got I don't know how many. I mean, I trained before Prozac. We have, so many more medications for psychiatric conditions now than we
True.
did when I was in training, and yet all of the conditions psychiatrists treat have skyrocketed,
Hmm.
and they're not even being that well managed.
Yeah.
And so it's like, at a certain point, you have to say, it it's insanity to keep thinking you're gonna find a solution to, these problems, you know the way that we've been trying to find a solution to these problems.
Yeah.
We need a totally different way, and so, I've become very, very interested in, um, sound and light and the way that sound and light work with we're basically just, sacks of water, okay?
Hmm.
Compartmentalized into all of these little multicellular compartments, but we're basically, you know, uh, sacks of water, and, um, and so understanding how light and sound, vibration interact with water and understanding
Mm,
the role that what the true role of information, okay? Yeah, finding out, where is the information that you need in the DNA and, whether you're talking about junk DNA or, which is not junk DNA, or you're talking about, gene coding DNA. I mean, all of that is really the most visible, concrete form of information, but that's not, that's not the level at which, I think that we should be trying to bring about change.
right.
It be
Absolutely.
it's like trying to do surgery with a sledgehammer,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
and, yeah, and so I'm interested in things that are really more about, um, restoring balance and harmony and allowing the wisdom of the body to then engage in its own healing processes. And, so that's one thing I'm interested in. But the other thing I'm interested in is, I mean, some of these kids have these abilities that I, um, heard about anecdotally, and if I could capture that, spend enough time with them to actually get some experimental protocol down to prove, a whole different paradigm, then that's what I wanna do. Um, it'll revolutionize things the same way that Einstein revolutionized things 100 years ago.
My goodness.
Sure.
And that's exciting too, because that's what inner science is all about is changing the paradigm of what healthcare is all about and bringing forward this evolutionary perspective and to study the non-material. That's what we have to study, and consciousness is changing, and you're a pioneer for it, and we fund it. So
That's
please look into some funding, and that's what our whole community is all about, this type of stuff being widespread through
well,
humanity.
yeah, well, I would really love to, I would really love to know more about getting funding because really, to say, one of the things that's fascinating to me is if you think about, um, what I just said, okay, about information, okay? So, there's information in words,
Hmm.
and so you have these traditions like, the Hindus have of saying mantras.
Right.
So what they're doing is they're combining the information contained within that word with the vibration that, the voice creates, which is, so you're sending that vibration throughout your body
Right.
and you're delivering that information, and that becomes a um an anecdote
Sure.
to whatever it is that mantra is specifically designed to do. And to me, I mean, that is fascinating. Yeah,
Hmm.
it goes along with, like Emoto's work with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and the effect on water.
Yes.
And so then you have to realize that um we have to really think about then, the implications too beyond all of that in terms of like what information are you taking in?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And because we're living in this information age where you have information at your fingertips, 24/7 unless the internet goes down,
Right.
and a lot of it is very toxic information.
Yeah. And it's our genes that are receiving this information. The epigenetics are affected by the environment, and the environment in our body are our thoughts and the information that we consume and the information we bring in. And really, the best pharmacy is right here. We have it all. So programming that information as to what we want to happen and to be able to study that and to prove it. I mean, as we know, science is kind of behind. It can only measure things. It's not very good at measuring things like gravity and consciousness and things like that, but it's going to get there. And in the meantime, I think having examples, even the N of one, figuring out how we can show enough evidence to let people know, to open their minds to believe in
Mhm.
possibility. And that's exactly what Inner Science Research Fund is doing. So we would love to work with you more in the future. We would love to fund some of your research, and we would love to have you back on the podcast again, because I'm sure there's so much more that we didn't touch on that we'd
I
love to
think we're
dig into.
just scratching the surface of where we can go with all of this, and, it really is just the beginning because, I think the world is so ready for this. We published a paper, or Dr. Joe published a paper with UC San Diego in Nature in, communication biology, and it's over 150,000 accesses to this paper, so the world is ready, and, like, the telepathy tapes being on Joe Rogan, I mean, the world is just begging for this to come to fruition, and the research needs to be there to quantify what's possible, I think.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Diane Hennacy. I don't think you have to be psychic to know that that was a great interview.
Oh my goodness. She's so knowledgeable. She has so much information in there, and we just scratched the surface of where we can go.
Absolutely. I so want to have her back and dive into so many of those different topics.
Yeah, and I love what she talked about as far as near-death experiences, and she's had a couple near-death experiences herself. That's
Yep.
so cool.
Yep. I love the part where she talked about that it's not something like psychic abilities isn't a part of the brain that we need to turn on, but it's more about that part that we actually need to turn off.
Yeah, and how she went into the right angular gyrus, which is that part of the brain, from what she's saying, that's how these kids and how you can have outer body experiences as you turn that off. That might be something that we can do in Dr. Joe's events, is like put our attention on turning that off, see if we go out of body.
That would be amazing without having to do the transcranial, the stimulation with the magnets. Just be able to do it by putting our attention elsewhere and quieting down that part of our brain would be amazing.
Yeah, if we can do other things by thought alone, I'm sure we can do this one.
Yeah. I also loved the part where she talked about like telepathy being kind of bi-directional. It's not just a send and a receive. And I remember hearing some research being done with dolphins where they were listening or trying to understand dolphin communication, and that in the information that's being sent in sonar from one dolphin to another, they're responding, and researchers are actually thinking that the patterns of information of where they interfere with each other
Yeah.
is actually where the communication is taking place. So I think that'd
Oh,
be really cool if we could discover that that's how telepathy works. It isn't just a send and a receive, but this tying together of information. I think that'd be amazing.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And how she talked about, parents, once they find out that their kids are telepathic, them being like, oh no, now my kids can, tune into what I'm thinking whenever. But that also allows those parents to become more aware of their thoughts and their feelings. And these kids can't be around people that are incoherent or in
Yeah.
chaos. They can sit with people and also observe them when they have heart and brain coherence, from what I understand from what she was saying.
Yeah.
So cool.
And the idea of there being no secrets. I mean, I think that it would be an evolution for humanity, is to be in a place where we don't have secrets, but no one cares. Like, everybody thinks, oh, what if they could read my mind? Well, but if we all have an open mind or this ability to communicate in that way, not only would our communication be greater and more effective and faster, but we wouldn't really care. We would understand, oh, we're all not that different, it turns out.
Yeah, it's so true. And then she talked about the brain being a filter. So
Mm.
if that is the case, and if the brain is a filter, then we truly are all connected consciously. So
Yeah.
it's really that we're getting in the way of, trying to keep our secrets in, rather than being able to just connect in the field, because the brain is just filtering all that information.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds so beautiful, that idea of coherence and being able to get to that state. And I loved how she spoke about that, the balance and the harmony, like so much effort and so much money and so much energy going into pharmaceuticals and all these drugs to treat various mental disorders, when really, if we can just find a way to do this, our own internal pharmacy, through heart and brain coherence, as Dr. Joe teaches, or balance and harmony, as she talked about.
Yeah, and you know what? We're at a place where neuroscience has not been around for very long. And can you imagine where it's going to go in the next 20 years? What discoveries are going to happen, not only from people like Diane Hennacy out there, but Joe Dispenza, InnerScience, that supports all of this. I mean, I think we're just on this amazing trajectory to really understand how powerful we truly are.
Absolutely. And for those of you who don't know what InnerScience is, we fund research on meditation, consciousness, the groundbreaking scientific studies on the physiological and biological effects of these things, meditation and consciousness, on the human body.
Yeah. And we're a mission-driven community, shifting the paradigm of healthcare together.
So if you'd like to learn more about us, you can go to our website, innerscienceresearch.org. We call the people who donate to us their catalysts. You can be part of the Catalyst community. We would welcome you to join us. If you want to learn more about Dr. Diane Hennacy, you can go to her website, drdianehennacy.com, and check out her book, The ESP Enigma, The Scientific Case for Psychic Phenomenon. And if you order directly from her website, she'll actually sign it for you, so you'll get an autographed copy, which I think is super cool.
And we talked a lot about Dr. Joe Dispenza. So if you want to join us at a future retreat, go to drjoedispenza.com. And if you like this episode and you want to see more of Dr. Diane Hennacy or any of our other guests that are so intriguing, please subscribe to our channel.
Yep, we'd love it if you'd leave comments, share with your friends, your family, your colleagues. And we so appreciate you being here today, and we hope you join us on the next podcast. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to seeing you in the field.
See you there.